Welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Hey, joining me on the show today, we've got Eliot Wajskol. We had an amazing conversation. One of the things that we struggled with as an organization at Hunt to Killer was how to integrate strategy into EOS. EOS, the framework in general, is incredible. It helps you identify right person, right seat. It helps you identify the things that you should be looking at on a weekly, on a monthly, on a quarterly basis to ensure that the organization is moving in the right direction. But one thing that we always thought that it was lacking was strategy. And so we all came together and we would all identify the top 3 to 7 things that would have to be done on a quarterly basis in order to hit our yearly objectives, in order to hit our 3-year picture. But there wasn't a lot of thought around strategy. And one thing that Elliot did is he talked about some of the frameworks that he used and how he integrates strategy into the rocks. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So I hope you enjoy the show. And see you on the other side. Thanks. Where did you first discover EOS?
So I got introduced to EOS at the time I was working with larger companies. My clients were sort of executive leadership teams in Fortune 500 companies. My background is entrepreneurial. I worked with growth-oriented companies. And at the time, someone handed me this book, Rocket Fuel, which is an EOS book, which introduced the concept of visionary and integrator, to a framework of looking at leadership roles with smaller organizations. When I was working with the larger companies externally, they sort of viewed me as a unicorn. I was sort of defined by what I wasn't. Given my background, I wasn't a real project manager. I wasn't a real program manager. I wasn't a real change manager. They shouldn't have had a strategy problem that far into it. They used to call me the fixer. I'd get a call. Can you just come in, figure out how we get this thing turned around? And I had a relationship with oftentimes visionary leaders that we would sort of say, if we need to kill the project, let's just kill it. And someone handed me the book Rocket Fuel, and all of a sudden it just clicked. It was just one of those moments where I said, oh my gosh, that's actually what I've been for my entire career. When I worked with smaller growth-oriented organizations, founder-led firms, effectively I worked as an integrator. I'm a natural born integrator. When I was working with the larger firms, larger organizations, effectively as a fractional integrator, working with visionary leaders in a world where that concept didn't exist at all. And so one, it was an aha moment of saying, oh my gosh, that's actually how I can best think about what my role is. And the great part is at the time, I was really looking at how do I get back to working with business owners, with founders, with entrepreneurial leaders, just where my energy comes from, where my background came from. And it was just a perfect moment of getting introduced to EOS at the right time. It became really, once I knew that there was a chance to be an implementer, that was just that next leap. It just made sense to jump over. But that's how I got introduced to EOS.
That's really interesting. So when you talk about kind of this idea of fractional integrator, like this is something that's really hot right now. It's actually something that we do. When you finally discovered that, like, hey, what I'm doing for these organizations, big and small, is the role of the integrator. How is that role different in like a smaller organization versus a larger organization?
You know, where I would come in were on projects that were somewhat self-contained, but within a large organization. But the thought process was identical. For each thing that I got into, we had to develop a shared vision. What were we trying to do? What were the objectives? We had to build a team very, very quickly, right people, right seats. Sometimes it wasn't always the right person, right seat, so we dealt more with influence rather than something direct, but we had to build a team quite quickly. We had to focus on the measurables that mattered. We had to focus on how do we keep things moving forward that both met the product objectives and the leadership organizational objectives. We were rolling things out on a consistent basis, so how we prioritized issues radically and focused on the right issue at the right time was huge and important. We had to put in place very quickly, oftentimes, process and systems, and we had to meet in a really effective way. And so that role of the integrator, of working in a model that was very much like EOS, and having to work very closely with the leadership teams, with the executives, with the visionary leaders to say, okay, how do we translate what's in your mind into action? You might want to go faster. I think we should pull back and go a little bit slower if what you want is execution. I want to go a little bit slower. Check. Got it. We got to move a little bit faster. And so that interplay of being able to take what's in the visionary leader's mind and then translate it into action and had the trusted relationship where you could make really hard decisions. And finally, where you had a visionary leader who could say, I trust you, we're going to delegate to you. I'm not going to be doing end runs. If we have to have that hard conversation, I'll have it with you, and I'll work through you to help the team to make sure the organization executes. Those are all real parallels, whether I was working in the large organization context or if there's a fractional integrator or an integrator in a smaller organization.
Interesting. So the concept remained the same. It was just a matter of like, was it the entire business or was it a department or division of the business, or was it the entire business, or was it this massive project or this massive idea in which needed to be integrated throughout the enterprise?
Absolutely, Ryan. Yes.
Got it. And so you read Rocket Fuel. That was an epiphany for me as well. That was when I finally understood who I was, and the reason that that I kept distracting the organization is because I didn't have someone that would say, "Stop, slow down.
Yes.
Let's focus first." I'm assuming that after Rocket Fuel, you read Traction. Did you have any other epiphanies at that point when you were like, "Oh, wait a minute! Like now I can see the entire matrix"?
I did, and I think in a couple of ways, and maybe the best through line is it might just connect to why I'm so passionate about this whole area in and of itself. My backdrop is entrepreneurial. I was 26 when I had my first entrepreneurial experience. I joined a startup, founder-led professional services firm. We grew that business to over about 11 years to about $25 million. From there, I rolled off of there and I worked with a founder-led startup retail healthcare chain that helped define the way that healthcare is delivered in the Pacific Northwest. I worked with those founders during the startup phase, headed up people and operations in a very rapidly growing organization. From there, I think the best I could say is I had a enormously misplaced sense of invincibility from a business perspective. I started up a barbershop chain concept, and there was a reason for it. And it did fine, but I just couldn't scale it and grow it the way that I wanted to. And in that moment, then there were a bunch of ahas that I had, and this ties to the connection I have to EOS. The first, I think, insight that I had is that my superpower, my strength is just different. It's working with business owners. It's working with founders. It's working with visionary leaders. I didn't have the language at the time, but at that time, I might have been a little bit more integrator and a little bit less visionary. And there's value in both. I think the second aha that I had is that everything I'd done up until then, we'd done some decent stuff. It was all through brute force. I actually never had meant to get into business. It was an accident. And for those people who have a true business systems mind, they're the rare few. They're the rare few. You got some balloons going. They're the rare few. I think what I realized for myself is that everything I'd done up until then was through brute force, and that just takes its toll. It takes its toll on your teams. It takes its toll on family. It takes its toll on friends. And it was just this sense that there had to be a better way. And I think the third aha that I had from that is that I just had this obsession with how do you take an idea, a concept, and how do you move it from idea to implementation. And so that's been a through line throughout my career. Ultimately that led me to work with really large scale companies like the Nikes, the Daimler trucks of the world, et cetera, mid-tier companies, smaller companies. When I got introduced to EOS, it was just one of those moments when I read Traction, some of those other books. One was this sense of, I was just mad at Gino Wickman. I love Gino, but it was a sense of, I've been inventing this thing over and over and over again, just not simple, elegant, take out the bells and whistles and make sure it all hangs together as a system. That was an aha. I think the second for me was, my gosh, I wish I had this 10, 15 years ago. I would have approached a lot of things quite differently. What I was missing was just a way of looking at the world. I'm obsessed about frameworks. I love frameworks and models. I just didn't have a way of looking at the world that could simplify things with a set of simple, practical tools and disciplines. That's EOS at the end of the day. So those were my ahas, was that sense of that's what I had been missing. And those are critical enablers. If you want to take an idea and make it happen, you've got to have frameworks, a way of looking at the world, and you've got to have ways of executing on things day in and day out so you can focus where you really want to focus and don't spend time where you shouldn't be.
Yep. I want to talk about, you said barbershop earlier, didn't you?
I did.
I want to talk about this. Like what was the barbershop? What was the idea? What was the concept? How'd you get it off the ground? This is good.
So for me, it was, there were a couple things. At the time, the way that I looked at it was that I just loved experience-based brands. I loved brands that were taking things that were standard and redefining it. So if you go back then, Starbucks was redefining coffee. Coffee used to just be this awful stuff you get in a can. You made it in the morning. You had a barely functioning drip coffee thing. And if you ever went to a restaurant or diner, whatever you had was pretty close to water. They redefined the experience into a third place, a destination. When you looked at grocery stores, most of them were just the same thing every single day. And Whole Foods and some others were just redefining what you could have as the experience. And I looked at barbershops and said, man, there's just nothing like that in this space. And so it really was the idea of how can I create a destination, a more consistent experience that a dad could feel comfortable going into, a dad could feel comfortable bringing their kid into, a mom could feel comfortable going into with their kid. That was the idea.
And so, what were the experiences, or what was the concept to realize that type of vision?
You bet. So I think today, at least in the Pacific Northwest, what you see is what I was looking to create. We were we just wanted to create an experience that felt a little bit elevated. You walked in, the shelving looked great. You had great product selection. We had free sodas, free drinks for folks. That was different at the time. The experience was a little bit more elevated. So, of course, we gave haircuts. We kept it somewhat basic. We also, I found a Beverly Hills barber who was in his 80s. He was starting to lose his vision, but he could do straight razor shaves with his eyes closed. I was a little bit nervous at the beginning. He taught us how to do straight razor shaves. So we had an entire team, so we could run 8 chairs with doing straight razor shaves. So that created a bit of a unique experience. And we were really obsessed about the customer service experience. So we really focused on what was the process, from the moment someone walked in the door to the moment people would turn around and greet them and acknowledge them, make sure that they knew that they were present. We checked them in. We were really focused on providing consistent, strong customer service experience. And then overall, just looking to routinize systems and processes. We really did view it at the time as we were looking at and saying, if we had to lift this and put it somewhere else, what could we do that would just be consistent? Effectively, what was a franchise process that we could build at the time? So those were all concepts that we had. The goal was just to have customers that loved it. They wanted to tell a friend. They'd bring in a kid, and they were comfortable doing that.
I love it. And it reminds me of the book. I think it's Blue Ocean Strategy or Blue Ocean Marketing, Blue Ocean something. But it's the whole notion of like taking things that already exist. It gets back to your Starbucks example, what you were doing with the barbershop. But the idea of like taking things that already exist and just tweaking them to a degree that makes them highly differentiated and puts them in a blue ocean instead of a red ocean where all the sharks are.
Yes.
And it gives like Cirque du Soleil, it gives examples of like Southwest Airlines, but like things that already exist. With the circus, it's all about, removing the animals and making it all about acrobatics and storytelling. Southwest, one flat fee and pick your seat and get to your destination. But really, really interesting. So talk to me about, when you are implementing EOS and you've got a client, like what's like the biggest kind of hurdle, obstacle, struggle kind of out of the gate as an organization is like, hey, we've hit the glass ceiling, like something here is not working, and we need some help. And so they come to you and you're like, I've got the secret sauce. I know it's the secret sauce because I've been doing this so long and I validated it for myself. What's the kind of the biggest obstacle to implement?
The way that I think about it is that there's an underlying. What I love about EOS is the framework itself. I think there could be more things to think about, more things to focus on, but the framework really says, look, focus on 6 things and just get really strong at them. Each of them, actually, there's something at the core. So, do we truly have a shared vision? And have we really answered at least 8 questions that are critical to answer as a team? Have we really built the right team? Do we have the right people in the right seats? Are we truly focused on the right data? And oh, by the way, when we look at that data on a weekly basis, there's stuff we got to do about it. And are we doing anything about it? Are we good at managing issues? And oh, by the way, oftentimes we don't dig enough and get to the heart of them. Are we putting process in place? And then do we have this radical discipline at how we meet every week, every quarter? And oh, by the way, that introduces something At the core of all of it, I think, is openness and honesty. It's the ability to communicate with each other. It's the ability to get to the heart. And that to me is the biggest hurdle that organizations have. The reason oftentimes they didn't get, or they're hitting the ceiling is actually partly that they haven't truly gotten everyone aligned in the vision. They don't always have the right people in the right seats. They don't always have the data. They don't always manage issues well, et cetera. And sure, having a consistent way of looking at the world says, I should have done that. The underlying thing oftentimes that holds them back is each one of those opens up what could be a Pandora's box of open and honest conversations. Do we really have the right people in the right seat? Look left, look right, and there might be someone at the leadership table who isn't. Are we really managing the data effectively? Well, if we dig into it, there might be someone who's not actually responding and acting appropriately to the data that emerges, et cetera. And so that to me is really the core. And that's one of the biggest advantages, I think, sometimes of having an external person, an implementer, support in rolling out EOS is because you can have a third party that says, hold on a second. The root of why we're having some of these challenges is we're not really having the conversation that needs to be had. Do we want to go there?
And what's interesting is the businesses, the size of a business when they can typically afford a certified implementer, like these aren't necessarily small mom and pop shops anymore. Like they have some sort of traction to where they're taking the business seriously. They want to get it to the next level. And so these are relatively, they're just not small. These generally aren't like a $1 million business. And what's interesting about what you just said there is sometimes they don't know what their vision is. And to think about that, like a company that they probably have something, like they probably have like, and I learned this in business school, you have vision, mission, and values. And like, those are the three things that you always need, to start a company. And so these businesses probably have it, but you're coming in and saying, maybe it's not the right vision, or maybe not everybody's aligned around that vision. How do you help them understand kind of what their core focus is?
You bet. I think a lot of it is, and by the way, the way you described it is, I think a lot of organizations, almost all the organizations I work with, when they decide to implement EOS, they're not tiny organizations. And oftentimes they're quite successful. More often than not, they're very successful. It's just that they're succeeding sometimes in spite of themselves. And that to me is really what the benefit of having a system like EOS is. It just sort of it helps you look back and say, have we really optimized the way that we're operating? I'm a terrible runner. I went for a 5-mile run this morning, and oh shoot, Ryan, did we just freeze up? Oh yeah. What I was going to say is I'm a terrible runner, and I went for a 5-mile run this morning. I was able to do it. If anyone who were a runner were to look at me, they'd say, boy, they're doing it in spite of themselves, not because they're executing really, really well. And here's a few tweaks that you could make. And that to me is the way I think about it when I'm working with a leadership team of an already strong organization. It's just, how do we get from where we are and get even better? And I was just going to come back to your question, but go ahead.
Yeah, no. Come back. How do you help them find the core focus there?
I think that so often of it, when I'm working with a team, I truly believe that I'm not there as a consultant from the perspective of I'm not there to provide the answer. I always tell every team that I work with that they will forget way more about their industry, about their business than I'll ever learn. So I'm not there coming in to give them advice about how they operate the business or what exactly they should be doing. I'm really coming in as a facilitator and coach. And the spirit of that to me is 90% of the time, the answer is actually in the room. It's just, how do we pull it out? And how do we get everyone aligned around it? And so the way we go about getting to the core typically is we're really just bringing a framework of questions and working with the team to come to a common answer about that. What are your core values? They know what the core values are. Ultimately, I'll work with them. We'll tease it out, and they'll get to the heart of the behaviors that truly, truly matter. That if they don't have those behaviors in the organization, they simply can't execute. And oh, by the way, when we get to the core, crystallize those behaviors, it's just who they are. Great, we get that down. What truly is the core focus of the organization? How do we really get to the heart of their why? Because if they don't know their why, their customers are never going to buy in to the extent that they can, nor will people that they want to bring into the organization buy in. So how do we get to the heart of the why? How do we get to the heart of the space that they actually play in? That's a sweet spot when you find your niche and you get clear about your why. The answers are typically within the room. And so we continue on down a set of questions that every team needs to answer. What are the core values? What's the core focus? What's our longer term 10-year target? Who exactly is our target customer? What's our message to them? Can we crystallize a 3-year picture and see it so clearly, so vividly that we could touch it with our mind's eye? We could taste that thing, bring it in closer. What's our 1-year plan? 3 to 7 huge goals. What are our 90-day objectives? What's our issues list? That's just a matter of working with a team, and especially with a good team, but even an above average team. They've got the answers. They just have it. We just haven't brought them together in a succinct way. The other part is we don't try to answer it all at one time. EOS to me is really a process. The power is at quarter after quarter after quarter, we're coming back to those answers. I've worked with leadership teams before that do all the strategic planning work, and you come back a year or two later and it's just gathering dust. And the reason is, it's not because they didn't do good work a year ago. Number one, the team's actually not aligned on it. So it doesn't matter. If I've got 5 people who developed a plan and they're not aligned around it, it's like I've got 5 people running 5 different companies. And more often than not, they did great work and then went into a drawer. And they open that drawer up a year later and they wonder why they couldn't even remember what the heck they said in the first place. And so the power of EOS is we do that work, we come back to it quarter by quarter by quarter, and it just gets distilled, refined, and the alignment grows, the execution grows.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about the quarter by quarter, because I know EOS kind of promotes this like 2-year graduation, but we didn't do that at Hunt to Killer. Like once we got an implementer, we kept our implementer, and the reason for that is like that outside perspective for us anyhow was critical as a business for continuity, and so we never like officially graduated from it.
Yeah, I think there's so much to that, which is that I always tell folks that, look, if you could go faster, sometimes companies will say, how fast can we go? And I would say, well, as hard as you're working at it, as much as you roll up your sleeves. But there's some clients that say, Elliot, we'd love to work with you forever. And that's not the goal. It's wonderful when there's a great client that does have that spirit and that energy. And I think so much of it is just simply that the benefit that as an external party I can bring is I've just seen the play run over and over and over again. Just like a great coach sometimes sees a whole lot of plays with a whole lot of teams. The players themselves are phenomenal on the field. If I were an athletic coach, everyone knows how to run their route really, really well. A coach just has the benefit of seeing a bunch of routes and a bunch of different ways of playing, and that they can bring that perspective. And that's why I think about the benefit when a team has an implementer over an extended period of time. That implementer can just sometimes bring in some different perspective. They've seen the plays run in different ways. They can ask some different questions over time. And at the end of the day, to me, the real thing is every single time, quarter by quarter by quarter, does the team see a return on investment? And when there's a partner that's seeing other ways of doing things, asking the right questions, ideally, that ROI is there.
Yeah, and you said something earlier about issues as well, and you talked about like every company's got issues, and they may be like trying to solve, but they're not solving the root issue. How do you help them, or how can a company identify a root issue or the root cause versus like just solving all of the symptoms?
Yeah. I think that sometimes companies get bound up in a couple of things. One is that there's just this flood of stuff that's coming at a leader, and it just seems like nothing is working. And so often the reason that nothing is working is because piece by piece by piece, we just haven't gotten to the heart of it. And we're moving so fast that we're constantly getting to this mode where we're just playing whack-a-mole. We're constantly putting fires out. I'll go ahead and mix my metaphors. And because we're not getting to the root cause, they just keep reappearing. And then those issues just keep mounting and eventually collapse under the weight of those. And so I think there are so many different ways to do it, but one of the methodologies is just simply to recognize we all have limited time and energy. We've only got so many hours in the week. If we could time box the time and energy that we spend on focusing on issues and problems to the extent we can, we don't peanut butter and spread them. We don't have conversations all the time in the hallway, on the drive home, et cetera, where we talk about things, but we don't make decisions. And so I think that the solve begins to be, how do we time box the time at which we're going to address certain issues? When we do, let's make radical decisions about them. Let's decide to decide. And what do we decide on? Well, if we could radically prioritize the issues that we have on any given week, because we can't do everything, and we define for any given week, what are the issues 1, 2, and 3? For any issue we're going to talk about, can we dig until we get our arms around it, feel like we got to the heart of it? Why? I love asking why 5 times. Or whatever methodology you want to introduce, can we dig until we can get to the heart of it and say, I think that I understand what this is really about for now. And then what I love about EOS or other disciplines is to say, now that we've talked about it, let's organize this into one of 3 boxes. Now that we got to the heart of it, there's some things we think we could do, let's not do it right now. We got way too much going on. Let's make sure we don't lose it. Let's put it into another box, long-term issue. Or we dig, we get to the heart of it. We talk about our solution options and we say, great, I think we just solved it in the room. Awesome. We just made a decision. Or we dig, get to the heart of it. We say, what are we going to do in 1 week to make progress on this so we don't lose it? The reason being, if I try to do things that's more than a week, now I'm getting in the way of the big objectives we're trying to move forward on, but let's keep it moving. And so I think there's so many different ways to go about it. But the way I think of it is, how do we radically prioritize what we're talking about in any given instance? Let's commit to making a decision so we can advance this thing and move forward. And when we do, let's make sure that we organize our thinking. Now that we got to the root cause, some stuff we love to do, but we can't do it right now. Let's not lose it. We got to have discipline in the organization to keep moving the big things forward. Sometimes we decide right away. And sometimes we say, great, what can I do to make incremental progress over the next week against this thing? Let's go do that. Let's come back to report back the week following. And week on, week out, if we keep doing this every single week of radical prioritization, we chip away at the things, take 1 hour out of every week for that portion of it, out of an overall 90-minute meeting that we introduce. If you keep doing that relentlessly week in, week out, you'll begin to tackle and get to the heart of major recisions. And every now and then there's a big one that you got to get to the heart of. Are we making the right strategic decision? Are we pursuing the right market? Do we need to rejigger fundamental process and systems? Well, at that point, if that ever happens, great. Look at that. And now that becomes the dedicated work effort. Let's call that a rock, something that might take a quarter to get after. And then we put radical focus on that. You bet. No doubt at all. You got it.
Okay. It's cutting in and out. So we'll make sure that we edit out and squeeze it together. You just talked about something that we had always struggled with when we were implementing EOS, and that was the strategy portion. Because all day long you can say, "Hey, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this," and you list your rocks, and then you just full bore, you go after it, and you just start checking things off. How have you helped companies think through more strategically in what they're doing to be able to identify the right rocks? Because when everybody comes in, they've got their own ideas. We throw it against the whiteboard. We figure out who has the same ideas, and we say, these are it for the quarter. These are it for the next 12 months. But how do you help your clients think through like the strategic nature of what they're actually doing?
One of the biggest things I think from a strategic standpoint is that oftentimes there's a series of questions that we haven't yet answered. And it's a sequencing of how do we answer those questions. An umbrella question might be, how do we even go to market? Should we go direct to the consumer? Should we go to a retailer? Is there a different solution? Do we even have the right product market fit? Whatever those larger sort of Uber questions are, what I find is those oftentimes become, the way I sometimes approach that is to say, can we answer a certain set of questions by a certain point in time? Let's force ourselves. Do we need to go out and get research? Do we need to talk to 12 other people? Do we need to, whatever that might be, because oftentimes we need to gather more information and then let's make a decision. And so the way I frame that sometimes is that might be a rock in and of itself. That might be one of the biggest things we've got to do for the quarter is answer question 1, 2, and 3. And if we wanted to even tighten that up, we could say, I don't know if we could pull this off, but could we try to break down some milestones? In 1 month, let's try to answer these following questions, and then let's make a go, no-go decision. Great. In another month, let's try to answer these questions. And then 1 more month, let's answer these questions. And so oftentimes I find that we get very, very tactical in organizations, but there's this nagging feeling that there's a bigger strategic question that we need to answer. And the only way we can answer that question is if we put some dedicated time, effort, and energy against it. And we have some sort of discipline to say, let's not let this float forever. Let's try to answer a certain type of question by a certain point in time, then let's try to get to next. And what I find is oftentimes that focus, that energy will help an organization answer some of the big strategic questions while still moving forward on the tactics they need to do to keep the business going.
I love that. So I've never heard that before, but that's actually brilliant, is dedicating a rock to the actual strategy. And the way that you're doing that is answering a certain amount of questions. So for us, it was always called DMP, which is draft and present. And so, maybe it is, we need to answer these 3 questions with data. And this is kind of what we're trying to solve for. And it's going to be some sort of presentation at the next quarterly pulse. And we're going to make a strategic decision. And then that's going to drive the subsequent rocks. That's pretty brilliant. I like that.
And I love that draft and present approach. And I think effectively you were doing that, which is you were creating milestones, a stage gate, let's make sure we answer these following questions by this particular date and time. Now we're going to make a decision and go forward.
So you spoke earlier about, sometimes when you're coming in and you're implementing for a new company, you have people that are looking to their left and their right and saying, maybe we don't have the right people around this table. How do you help companies identify if they have the right people in the right seats?
I'll say that I think this is one of the places where there's a simplicity and an elegance to the methodology that EOS brings. And at the same time, there's always a right time and pace. An organization can only go as fast as it can possibly go. And so what I find is that there's a framework that a team can answer and that a team can go utilize in answering that question. What happens also often is that when we grow businesses, I think the brilliance of entrepreneurs, the best entrepreneurs I think that are out there, they bring two things. They just somehow have this knack at the business that they're in, whether there's a tradesperson or whatever field they might be in. They just somehow are good at doing this thing. And they somehow have this ability to attract people to them to come along on the journey. At some point in time, you hit this inflection point where you keep doing the thing that you've been doing, but you keep growing and growing and growing, but you've outgrown the team. You're just not structured the right way and you don't have the right people in the right seats. And for those leaders that have that sense of, I feel burned out now. I thought that I delegated it. Why did I jump right back into it? Why are we having trouble executing on this thing repeatedly? Why do I feel like I keep coming in with these new ideas and everyone's just ducking for cover? They just wish it would go back to what it was. And then hopefully I walk out of the room and then they can settle back into how it was yesterday. That feeling so often comes from not having the right people in the organization or the right people in the right seats. And so I think the framework that we introduce is one where we say, first of all, let's get crystal clear on what the core values are of the business. The leadership team can play. We get to the heart of the behaviors that truly, truly matter. And we define what's the bar. By that, what we mean is once you've gotten clear on the behaviors that truly matter in your organization, we kind of have a sense of, is someone there? It's not just who they are. It's called a plus. Are they sort of there, sort of not, but not terrible? Let's call that a plus minus for that particular behavior. And a minus just means they could be great people. It's just not who they are. We've got to surround ourselves with people who consistently demonstrate the core behavior that truly, truly matters, called the core values. So we give a framework to the leaders to say, now we understand let's call that a right person, a right fit for our organization. On the other side, we've got to get to a place where we escape building organizations around people. As much as we love people, we've got to focus on the structure of the organization, the core things that have got to get done really well. It doesn't matter who's in it. It's independent of that. Marketing and sales, I got to let the world know that we exist. I got to bring that interest into an order. We'll call it marketing. Got to be done really well, no matter who's in it. We got to fulfill the promise to the customer, whatever that means. Call it operations for a minute. That's got to get done, regardless who's in it. When we get really clear about what are the core functions that have to get done for each organization, it's different for different organizations. And then we say, okay, got it. Now, inside of each of those functions, let's call it a seat. I need someone who's truly accountable. They own it. And that person has got to fit our organization from a culture standpoint, the behaviors we just defined, and they got to have a couple other characteristics. For that particular seat, that particular function, they actually have to get it. They have to have this intuitive sixth sense for what it is. They got to want it. By the way, as leaders, we're at all sorts of seats that we don't really want. We're just doing it because we have to, then we get burned out. So they got to actually want it. And they have to have the acquired skills, knowledge, competency to do it really well. When we create that framework for a leadership team that says, now let's just look at our organization dispassionately. Can we agree that these are the core functions we got to have? Check. Yes. Wonderful. We sure? Yep. Those are the core functions. Great. Who's in each seat? Or who do we want to have in each seat? Great. Now for each person, do they truly fit the core values? And do they truly get it, want it, and have the capacity? And so often when we get done, we find that there's a couple challenges. Sometimes we got the right person. They fit from they've got the core values, but they don't get or want or have the capacity for that seat. And the way we would define that is to say that, great, let's work on that. Because we can only have so many people that are right people from a culture standpoint, but not right for the seat, and still be a for-profit organization. And conversely, sometimes, to me, this is the scariest one. We've got someone who's in the right seat. They get it, want it, have the capacity. I pick on sales every now and then. They're delivering the numbers, but they're just not right for the culture. And then they're killing us in ways big or small. And ultimately, we need to resolve that challenge. And the pressure that I try to put on a team is to say, at some point, we got to get to 100% right person, right seat. And when you do, it's liberating because you're doing your best work and everyone else is doing their best work. How fast can we get there? Well, every organization moves at its different speed, but at some point we have to get there. And that's a framework that we introduce to help a team ultimately identify the challenges and then move to building the organization they truly need.
And when you talk about right person, right seat, have you seen where there's a right person in the organization and there's been a successful transition to get them into a different seat inside of the organization?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those are the most fun for me when there's an aha or light bulb moment. One example would be we went through the process and we looked at the finance person, raised their hand when we got to the finance seat and said, that's me. I should be in that seat. By the way, did I just break up? Let me answer that question again.
It's okay. It's downloading. Yeah. No.
I just saw it on my, that was
good.
On my side.
We'll chop it in.
What I was saying is we had that exact situation where we had went through the process to find the seats. The finance person raised their hand and said, I belong in that seat. And we went through it. And every single person in the organization said, actually, you don't get it. And the person themselves looked at it and said, yeah, I don't get it. And it made total sense. The seat as they had defined it was effectively a director of finance seat. The organization had grown. That person, despite the best of their abilities, they came in as a controller and they moved up to a bookkeeper and they moved up to head of accounting. They were doing their absolute best, but the organization had outgrown their capabilities. But the person was absolutely right from a culture standpoint. Not only that, they had a unique relationship with the visionary and they had an obsession about execution, which is probably why they were good in finance for as long as they were. That person was a natural integrator. She had just an absolute relationship with the integrator that was an oil and water relationship. They could battle it out and walk out as one. When it mattered, they walked out as one. That person was able to say, slow down, let's execute. Or, got it, we need to go faster. I'm uncomfortable, but we're going to go make this happen. And so that was an instance where we had the person who would be forward leading up finance, but not as well as they could have, moved into the integrator role. Absolute magical relationship between that visionary and integrator. And we found a way to backfill for the finance seat.
When you think about right person, right seat, and then the accountability function, and so thinking about the scorecard, and we're going through the scorecard on a weekly basis, like how can you effectively kind of hold people accountable while at the same time making sure that everybody sitting around that table is focused on helping not necessarily that person, but that core function out and be effective?
Yeah. I think what you might be asking is, I think that there might be a challenge in how someone is executing on their role or their function, or I'm seeing a lot of problems and challenges with this particular function. And in there, how do we make sure that we're all keeping our eye on making sure the organization as a whole is moving forward? Is that maybe the question? And I think I see this all the time because what ends up happening is when you have a great scorecard and you start looking at it week in and week out and you're actually measuring the things that matter, you start making things really transparent really, really quickly. And functions that are having challenges, you'll see that. Marketing just isn't delivering what it needs to. Sales isn't delivering what it needs to. Operations isn't delivering what it needs to. And I think at the heart of it, the way I think about it is, let's for a moment suspend judgment. Let's not focus on the person if we can. Let's focus on the problem we're trying to solve. The problem we're trying to solve is how do we unlock marketing? How do we unlock sales? How do we unlock operations? And so if as a team, we can be focused on how do we solve the problem. The root cause of that might be people, process, systems, or strategy. But too often we go straight to person. And we're not looking enough at, do we have the underlying systems right? Do we have our processes right? Is our strategy right? And sometimes we may not have the right person. And so I think that when we have a disciplined approach of looking at the measurables that matter, those just become issues that we're dropping down to the issues list. How do we solve for those? If we find repeatedly that there's a leader that simply can't move the measurables that matter, but we agree that the goals are right, they're having trouble executing on the rocks, the big initiatives they need to move forward on, and they're not really open and honest and getting to the heart of things when we're solving for issues, that's a clear indicator that we got a people problem. And ultimately we need to solve for that. But so often we've got leaders who are pretty good, but they have really, really difficult problems. And then we can focus more as a team on focusing on, is it a people problem, a process problem, or a system problem, and focusing on solving it together where we need to, or putting the accountability on the leader to go figure it out.
I was just getting a little bit into the scorecard and asking you, organizations are obviously looking at something when they come in and talk to you. Like there's some sort of metric, whether they have a North Star, whether they're looking at sales, or maybe they're just looking at the balance sheet and the P&L on a weekly or monthly basis. But how do you help them really identify and understand the metrics that are going to move the needle?
Yeah. I think that there's a couple of components to that. I think the first part is just really recognizing that so often we're focused on outputs versus inputs. And the more that I can be focused on what are the upstream activities that when I do that at the right volume, the right intensity, that leads to another result. And then that leads to another result. And then that ultimately leads to what I'm looking for: revenue, profit, throughput, whatever those things might be, the outputs that I'm looking for. And so one part is just working with the team to say, how do we keep moving upstream and understand what are the repeatable activities that if we just do those right at the right volume, the right intensity, or sometimes it's about removing errors. So reducing at times. So if we can either increase something or reduce something. But if we get to the heart of what are the activities that really matter, that begins to be an aha. Because oftentimes we're not actually measuring those activities and having to rigor against those. So that's one. And what I find is that as a team starts getting really focused on what are the upstream activities, how many sales calls do I need to make? How many warm leads do I need to convert to a face-to-face meeting? How many face-to-face meetings then convert into a contract? How many contracts then convert into whatever those things might be? When we can start to define those true measurables that matter, that begins to be a great first draft. And oftentimes, if I can just get really dialed in on just 5 to 15 measurables, that's enough to unlock the activity that we need to have to get the output that we're looking for. What I would say is there's a second layer. As we start to put in place, or as an organization starts to harden up the processes and systems, so the process component of defining what are the few things we've just got to do right every single time. Oftentimes that unlocks a whole other set of measurables that we say, got it. If I'm in a factory and I need to double down and make sure that the screw is tight every single time, because that's part of the process that's really, really critical. Awesome. Now that might become one of the other measurables that we add to the scorecard because we got to do that right all the time. So that's what I typically find is if we can focus on the activities that lead to the results we're looking for relentlessly, and that either is because we intuitively know our business, or over time, as we keep putting processes in place, it gets more clear that, that's something we should be measuring and monitoring and making sure we do all the time. Between those two, we start to find the measurables that truly matter. And we just spread that from a leadership team scorecard to the scorecard for every single function so that we're all constantly looking at the measurables that matter.
I love that. So one of the things that you said that stood out to me on that was the inputs versus the outputs. Like we always look at the outputs, but by the time the outputs happen, like it's already over. You're just looking at the track record versus the inputs, and really understand like what are the inputs that are driving those outputs, and let's measure the inputs to make sure we're getting the right outputs.
And I love that, right? And I'll give you one other example of that, which is I have a personal scorecard. I actually review it. So I run myself on EOS with my assistant. We have a weekly level 10 meeting. It's a 90-minute meeting. We run it just like anyone else would. One tweak, I cheat and I stick in a few personal measurables so that I've got an accountability partner on that. And my personal measurables, the way I think about it is the same thing. It's what's upstream that leads to the output that I'm looking for. And the lens that I have is what could give me a true pulse, a sense of what's going to happen rather than what already happened. Because we spend way too much time looking at output results, monthly revenue, monthly balance sheet items, etc. And so I can be measuring all sorts of stuff personally. My doctor would love for me to measure a bunch of stuff that I'm not really keeping track of, I'm sure. Mine are 4. From a personal standpoint, I only use this as an illustration for how I think about this from a business standpoint. My 4 happen to be how many days a week do I work out? It's purely a mental thing. Another measurable for me is how many days a week do I do a dedicated stretching thing? That one's actually physical. How many hours on average do I sleep every night? And how many days a week do I do a meditation type practice? And what I find is if I just pay attention to those 4 things, if I were off track for 2 weeks in a row, you would know it. I just show up wonky. And as I kept playing with those numbers, I found that one of those, if I'm off on, I can't do anything about the other 3. I can't. It's just really, really hard. And I can't do it for more than for a week or so. And so that's the way I think about it, is those are upstream input activities that if I do those, I just show up right. The output is I show up in a better way. And I've got an absolute pulse. I know that if I'm off for 2 weeks in a row, well, my assistant knows, I'm just going to start showing up wonky in the world. And that's how I think about great measurables from a business perspective.
What's the one? What's the one that if that one's off, everything else is going to be wonky?
If I don't exercise, I just can't manage the other ones.
Interesting.
It truly is a mental thing for me.
I would have thought you were going to say sleep.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So it's the exercise.
I can push through sleep. It's just me. I can push through sleep. If it's more than a week, I can't. But I can pull off the other ones if I'm off. The exercise, I can.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. All right. So Elliot, someone's listening to this right now and they're like, I want this guy to be my implementer. I want to have a conversation. How would they find you?
Absolutely. If you just go to the EOS Worldwide website, you can search. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, so you can search under Portland, Oregon, or just look for my name, Eliot Wajskol, EOS Implementer, and you can find me.
And if you could have, do you drink beers or do you drink coffee?
You bet.
Okay. So if you could have a beer with any other EOS implementer, who would it be?
I'm going to bow out. Here's the beautiful thing about that one. The only reason I'm going to bow out, the EOS community has just an amazing, amazing group of folks. And I have to tell you, what drew me to EOS is that in the we're all independent folks. My prior world, the very first organization that I was in, one of the things I loved about it is we could only have built the business that we did off of just being relentless about bringing to life an amazing set of core values. That's what made that place so magical. And being independent, you lose a sense of having a sense of core values in an organization. I used to beg, borrow, and steal them with the companies I worked with. Whenever I come in externally, I'd always find an organization with a great leader and a good set of values. When I looked at EOS and I saw the core set of values and I saw the group of implementers who were there, and so many of them are folks who, as we've had the experience of implementing EOS in our organizations, we've exited, and now we want to go share that with others. It's an amazing group of folks. So I just feel so lucky, so fortunate to be in a group where I can pick up the phone any day, or I can throw a stone and hit someone who's just a great human being with a set of core values. We just live who we are. We're authentically who we say we're going to be. So I could give you a few names, but then I give you a laundry list and I feel bad because I left someone out.
That's it. It's everyone. What I just heard is everyone.
It is. Yeah, you got it.
Awesome. Well, Elliot, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. So many takeaways. I've got a whole page full of notes at this point, so I can't wait to do the intro. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet, Ryan. This is an absolute blast. It's fun. You asked great questions, and obviously it's born from your experience working with EOS and just appreciating what it's done for you and knowing the mechanics of how it did what it did for you, for your organization.
I love it. I drink they call it the orange Kool-Aid. I drink the orange Kool-Aid all day long. So awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Confessions of an EOS Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses that operate on EOS, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for EOS Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.